organizers. Thank you for having me. So I will speak a little about cyber warfare crimes and what the EU can do against them. So first, the definition of cyber warfare is using computer technologies to disrupt or destroy an adversary's information system and network. And it's usually, it has a brighter scope. So it's not an attack on some small company, but it's an attack on the state's infrastructure, nuclear power plants, army infrastructure, and so on. And to be a cyber warfare attack, it means that it must be conducted by a foreign state or its army, or it can even be an organized group of hackers backed up by the state or by the army. If these are just normal hackers conducting some cyber attacks, this is not cyber warfare. So the question now is, what if a country or the whole EU is attacked by a cyber warfare attack from abroad? What can the EU do? We have already seen that there is no military response from the EU. Maybe each country on itself could have a military response, but not the EU. So the next question is, do we have some kind of criminal EU response? So what can we do? So for the first question, or the first point would here be, is there a European criminal law on its own? So does the European criminal law presents itself like a sovereign state, that we have a European criminal code, and can the EU prosecute perpetrators of such attacks? And the answer is no. So there is no such institute, and the question now is why? And the answer to that is because the criminal law is the ultimate or the final phase of the state sovereignty. So a state without its criminal law is not a sovereign state. And the European states do not want to give this sovereignty to the European Union. So in this regard, states in the EU, this is like a marriage agreement. But the states, they are like the wife. They do not want to give too much because we know that the husband loses everything. His freedom, his friends, his property. But the wife is smarter. She gives only a little. And here it's the same. We give a little sovereignty to the state, to the EU, but not too much. So what the state is prepared to give, when it comes to EU's financial motives and interest, we are prepared to adopt some of its legislation. So the EU can present some criminal legislation, and we will then adopt it when it goes for EU's financial interest. And one of such interests is also cyber warfare attacks. And for this purpose, the EU has drafted the directive EU 2013-40-EU. So this is a directive on attacks against information systems. I will not go deeply into this directive, but the point is that this directive includes illegal system interference and illegal data interference. So any kind of cyber warfare attack will always include these two, because it's impossible to attack the information system without damaging the system or the data in the system. So this will always be included. So in a way, we have legally, this is covered. But here we have two problems. The first problem is that the goal of this directive was never to fight cyber warfare attacks. It was always just to combat some ordinary cyber crimes, like from hackers, our computers, our data. It was never meant for this broader scope of military warfare, information warfare. And the second problem is this was adopted in 2013, so 11 years ago. And in 11 years on the field of cyberspace, a lot can change. So there was no developments after that from 2013. Okay, so legally this is what we have in the EU. So the next topic that I would like to shortly discuss, does the EU have any kind of institutions or organizations that can combat cyber warfare crimes on its own? So we have quite a lot of EU institutions. I will name some of them, like Europol, Eurojust, Court of European Justice, Olaf, and so on. So let's just look at very briefly at each of them. So the first one is Olaf. Olaf deals mainly with financial frauds against the interest of the EU. So it will not be applicable for cyber warfare. We cannot help each other with this institution. Then we have the European Public Prosecutor's Office, a very important organization or institute that has the power to investigate, prosecute, and bring to judgment crimes against the EU budget. Again, it's financial interest of the EU. When it comes to military interest, it has no jurisdiction. Then we have the European Court, which the only task that it has is to interpret the EU legislation. So it cannot bring criminals to justice, it cannot prosecute, it cannot have trials or something like that. Again, very limited scope of what it can actually do. Then we have the Europol. This is the most important police organization of EU. So it's like a police agency of the European Union. But again, no executive powers. So the Europol cannot arrest anyone. They cannot conduct any kind of investigations that would have any kind of real effect on the national level. What it does is it gathers information. So it's more like an information gathering institution. But of course, this information can then be used on in national courts. But without the help of the national police, again, it cannot do anything. Then we go further on to Eurojust. So this is a criminal justice and judicial cooperation organization of the EU that combines lawyers, judges, but again, it lacks any real formal investigative powers. So decision to investigate or prosecute crimes falls to the national authorities. Without the approval of national authority, this organization, again, cannot do anything on its own. So again, we come back to this sovereignty of the state. And when it comes to criminal law, we just do not want to give anything away to the EU, or we give very, very little. So the last institution, which is more of a protecting institution against cyber warfare, is the European Network and Information Security Agency, ENISA, but its goal is mainly enhancing cybersecurity across Europe, not really prosecuting crimes or investigating perpetrators and so on. So not really much we can do with it also. Of course, except the protection against the crimes. So what would be the conclusion of all I have said? So the legal situation is far from ideal on the EU level. We lack any kind of clear legal definition of what cyber warfare is. We are very limited how we can combat cyber warfare on the EU level. Without the cooperation of the national authorities, we cannot do anything. So what would be my final conclusion? It is up to the member states, as it is now, to implement some kind of stricter legislation for cyber warfare offenses. This is one option. It's up to the states to decide what they will do. But if the EU wishes to develop a system of joint military defense, a legislation that would provide further protection of member states against cyber warfare attacks will be needed in the future. Thank you.